of the day. This is going to enable us to continue our conversation on security in the Sahel region. This panel is particularly focused on the evolution of security in Mali, Mauritania, and Nigeria. Our three panelists for this afternoon session, of course, the first you've already met, Dr. Anouar Boukhars, non-resident scholar here at the Carnegie Middle Eastern Program and an associate professor at McDaniel's College in International Relations here, just across the border in Maryland. Is the author of Politics in Morocco, Executive Monarchy and Authoritarianism, and he's also co-edited a book called Perilous Desert, Sources of Sahara Insecurity and Perspectives on Western Sahara Myths, Nationalism, and Geopolitics. Our second speaker is a good friend of mine, Professor Boubacar Njai, who has a dual appointment in political science and Africana studies at the Wooster College in Ohio. The College of Wooster in Ohio is widely published on various topics, including African politics, Pan-African issues, security, civil-military relations, and security sector governance in Africa. Is also the founding member and chair of the Africa Security Sector Network, a Pan-African think tank that advocates for and endeavors to bring about a democratically governed and citizen-centered security policies and practices in Africa. And last but not least, Dr. Gbemisola Animasawun. Animasawun. Thank you very much. I'm learning you. Who teaches at the Center for Peace and Strategic Study at the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. He's also a 2014 residential postdoctoral fellow at the African Peace Network of the Social Science Research Council. His research covers also a wide spectrum: radical Islam, autochthony, and citizenship, interfaith relations, and neo-patrimonialism, especially as they affect peace, conflict, and insecurity in the African context. And of course, I'm the moderator for the session. My name is Ismail Rashid. I teach history and international relations at Vassar College. Between the three panelists and I, we have an agreement that they would have about 10 to 12 minutes each for their presentation. If you want to push it, absolutely, please don't go above 15 minutes so that we can have really a good and vibrant give and take as we had in the last session. So we would start the presentation in the order in which there's in the program. So Anouar.
All right, thank you, Ismail. So I'll address Mauritania. As you know, Mauritania is a rare bright spot amid regional tumult. It's tucked between Arab North Africa and Black West Africa. So the state has weathered so far the storms of revolt and militancy gathering around it. This is no small feat for an impoverished country that is bedeviled by fragile politics, military factionalism, ethno-racial tensions, and budding militancy. But Mauritania's success, however, does not mean it's out of the woods yet. The country, as you probably know, is at a structural disadvantage, marked by climate vulnerability, inequality traps, and the precarious geopolitics of the Sahel-Sahara region. Mauritania's volatile ethnic and racial mix adds to the uncertainties that underlie its fragility. Right? The Haratin, which is the freed slaves, about 40% of the population, and the Afro-Mauritanians, about 30% of the population, come from the south, and in particular, they face structural and institutional discrimination. Right? So this discrimination has given rise to new forms in the last few years of popular mobilization that have coalesced around generally radical political positions. So let's start with the positives, right? Since Mohammed Abdelaziz ascended to the presidency in 2009, the Mauritanian government has neutralized the terrorist threat to the country. And that's an important achievement. The Mauritanian state under Aziz, President Aziz, adopted a multi-pronged approach to contain the spread of violent extremism, right? Remember, Mauritania was the first state to be targeted by the Sahelian branch of Al-Qaeda. The state, or Aziz, President Aziz, encouraged mainstream Islamists to engage in theological debates about violence and rebellion in Islamic law. They engaged prisoners and radical Salafis. So this theological house cleaning was led, as I said, by moderate, pragmatic Islamists and their main or major theoreticians who were eager to position themselves as intermediaries between the state and violent radicals. The Mauritanian authorities, under the leadership of President Aziz, they supplemented the soft counterterrorism campaign with a proactive and hard counterterrorism strategy. President Aziz boosted the country's anti-terror defenses. Unlike in Mali, he modernized the army. He enacted counter-radicalization strategies designed to mitigate the radicalization of vulnerable populations. The Mauritanian government, unlike again Mali, the Malian government, reinforced its presence in the hinterlands by building its capacity to control border crossing routes and their interconnections, obviously with help from the United States and the European Union. In addition, the Mauritanian government tightened its grip on mosques and it increased its monitoring of preachers and suspected extremists. So all of this had some positive effects on the trajectory of radicalization in Mauritania. Today, cross-border threats seem to be contained, right? The government's counter-radicalization efforts, they show some progress as well. But more needs to be done. The hard road ahead, while counter-terrorism efforts may have helped to counter violent extremism, unfortunately, they have not addressed the underlying causes of dissent in the country. Mauritanians still constitute an appreciable number of battle-experienced jihadists operating in the Sahel-Sahara region. So relative to its population size, which is very small, about 4 million people, right? No other country in the Sahel-Sahara region produces as many jihadist ideologues and high-ranking terrorist operatives as Mauritania does. Mauritania so far has benefited from driving its most hardened militants to its neighbors, away from its borders, right? It has also benefited from the voluntary influx of jihadi wannabes in Mali and Libya. The question is, okay, the potential return of these battle-hardened combatants must be a cause of concern for the Mauritanian authorities. Mauritania also remains highly exposed to resurgence of violence and militancy coming from northern Mali and also from Libya. There are other critical vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities, they consist of the government's slow progress in addressing the socio-economic grievances, social inequalities, ethnic grievances, racial grievances. Not much has been done in this regard. Unfortunately, President Aziz has avoided the harms that would drive the roots of social tensions. Economic, in the last few years, it has averaged 5% a year, right? At least since 2012. It's pretty good. Progress can also be noted in infrastructure development, in the reduction of absolute poverty. But again, much is left to be desired. Mauritania still suffers from high levels of corruption, from an uneven distribution of wealth, and from an inequitable and unfair distribution of public resources. Public education remains in a crisis, while access to drinking water, to electricity, to health services is very limited and is very unbalanced. The government's efforts so far to invest in human capital and to provide targeted cash transfers to the most vulnerable households have been poorly executed. Social polarization and political turbulence over land rights, property rights, over racial and ethnic representation in the political and bureaucratic apparatus of the state are worsening. Right? The Haratin, I mentioned earlier, make up about 40% of the population, black, and the majority of soldiers in the army, about 70% of conscripted soldiers, they are becoming increasingly assertive in their demands for social equality, increasingly assertive in their demands for inclusion into positions of power and authority. The increasing activism of Haratin has become a major, for now, irritant for the government, which fears the prospect of the creation of a united front of black Mauritanians. The worst case, or the nightmare for the government, is if the Haratin, 40% of the population, and the black Afro-Mauritanians, 30% of the population, they unite against the Bidam, the so-called white Moors who control most of the apparatus of the state and its economic resources, right? And we can't obviously say that this possibility or this prospect might not transpire. So many of these social and ethnic conflicts are intertwined with religion. That's where it gets even more complicated. For example, Biram Ould Abid, he's a famous anti-slavery activist in Mauritania. He ran for president and he came second in 2014, is one example. His trouble with the authorities began in earnest in 2012 when he burned copies of a text from the Maliki School of Islamic Law, a religious text that he deemed to be promoting slavery. The book burning caused a firestorm in Mauritania. Protests, rioting, religious clerics denouncing Abu Abd for stoking the religious strife, for being an apostate, etc. So tensions over religious texts, the interpretation Islam says about slavery, flared up again in several other cases. One in Wadi, which Wuld al-Mukhtar, he was for writing an article that denounced some religious texts that social order. He was critical for making light of the Prophet. So group mobilization has also become more in the Mauritanian part of the Senegal River Valley, where Afro-Mauritanians have been militating for justice and equality through several organizations like My Nationality movement. Ethnic tensions in the valley, which is deeply rooted in historical mistrust and suspicion between black and light-skinned Mauritanians, are prevalent between herders that are white Moors and farmers that are black Fulani. The hardening of organized ethnic claims can also be seen in the campaign of resistance to the president's investment projects and to the multinational companies that invest in food and agriculture. Both the Haratin and the Afro-Mauritanians are vociferously opposed to such investments by agro-business major firms, because most of these firms are controlled by white Moors, right? So President Aziz has so far managed to contain these social tensions, right? And he made some changes, to be fair to the president. For example, he appointed General Sultan al-Mohammed Siad, who belongs to the marginalized caste of the blacksmith, as chief of staff of gendarmerie. He appointed Mamadou Diallo Bahia, an Afro-Mauritanian, as Minister of National Defense. So this is, that was a signal to this community. Aziz also created a national solidarity agency for fight against the vestiges of slavery, an agency for integration, for the fight against poverty. In 2015, the government or parliament passed stringent new laws replacing the 2007 law criminalizing slavery. So, recognized non-governmental organizations were also granted the right to defend the victims of slavery. That's new. But the president's ability to navigate the minefield of racial and ethnic politics will not last for long, without major extensive reforms. His government so far has made very slow progress in tackling the long festering grievances of the Haratin and Afro-Mauritanians. And these problems are fueling the rise of radicalization, especially for communities that have few outlets to seek redress. Whether the president is willing and able to press forward with more reforms to the formal and informal institutions, rules, and procedures that sustain discrimination, clientelism, and neo-patrimonialism is far from clear. I mean, in the end, the political system grants Aziz substantial powers to rule and effect change. But at the same time, the president is hamstrung by special interest groups, to which he is beholden. I mean, the overall pattern of political and economic domination has remained unchanged for decades, despite the country's many regime changes. At the center of influence in Mauritania today are still the same protagonists that share family ties and clientelistic linkages. So as I said, it's very difficult to see President Aziz enacting substantive changes because his political future, in the end, depends on elite networks and clientelistic relationships. And I can engage further in these points and what to do in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anouar. Boubacar.
Thank you, Ismail. And let me first join everybody in thanking those who put together this conference. First, of course, my colleague Anouar, and of course my good friend Cyril and their organizations. I really appreciate the opportunity of escaping a little bit the punishing teaching regiment I have been subjected to this semester in particular. Let me first say that I am a Mauritanian. I am one of those 30% Afro-Mauritanians Anouar just mentioned. So I will publicly say what I told Anouar earlier. He wrote an excellent piece on Mauritania. So although I'll be jumping back and forth between Mali and Mauritania, what I'll be doing is just to complement what Anouar had just said and has written in that excellent piece, and maybe to update a few things I am privy to that are quite recent. At the end of last year, I was in Mali on November the 20th. If some of you remember, that's the date the Radisson was attacked. I was about 2 miles away from that hotel. The day of the attack, I was supposed to meet a colleague at the Radisson. To this day, I have not much courage to tell my wife. So I have been in and out of that region doing research, meeting the major actors, talking to people who were involved in these crises. I did this study for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa on insecurities in the Sahel and the drivers of insecurity. So what I'll be saying, again, presenting a few observations on the Sahel, will focus on Mali and Mauritania in particular, on which I focus my research. A few to kind of the line what's going on in Mali now. That will inform our discussion on the nexus between the cross-border security, democracy, and other issues in the Sahel. First, just over the last maybe 1 week or so, a huge bust in Mauritania. I'm talking cocaine and hard drugs. So that is quite important in the Sahel. As you've heard on the previous channel, it is one of the drivers of insecurity in that region. Another part of this is the increased radicalization in Mauritania, as just Anouar mentioned, in the form of a communique by a group called FLAM, which is Force de Libération Africaine de Mauritanie, until recently radical clandestine group that was acting on behalf of Negro Mauritanians. That communique basically said, in fine, that, well, now has come the time since our voice has been heard. And by the way, they tried to transform themselves into a political party to just play the political game. They were denied that opportunity. Well, since this is the situation, we now will contemplate underlining every possible option, which of course they implied may be violent. One of the groups that Anouar just mentioned in Mauritania, Touche pas à ma nationalité, that is the hand off my nationality, an Afro-Mauritanian group that was trying to get citizenship for Mauritanians there on the ground, but also those who had been deported in the late 1980s. When they returned, some of them did return, to get their citizenship has been a problem. That group went to Senegal to kind of learn from some of the civil society groups how to engage in mass action on the ground. So basically, militantism is certainly coming to Mali, to Mauritania in this case, not necessarily the religious kind, which I'm going to say a word about in a moment. Another dimension that I think needs to be also is corruption, massive corruption in Mauritania, and I'm going to say a word about that in Mali also. But just a week, a major actor in the administrative and political system in Mauritania was arrested because an investigation was going on in the UK about this British company that engaged in some corrupt behavior in some African countries, including Mauritania. And this seemed to have revealed for everybody now to see is in Mauritania, and which also can be a serious problem, particularly now that the growth that Anouar mentioned that was real has started to basically fade away because the price of oil, a little bit that is exported, of iron, and even fish and gold has gone down and putting a lot of pressure on Mauritania. Now, a little bit to Mali. Mali, with the election of Boubacar, its president, hoped that finally a person with some experience in running the country, but also with the reputation of being someone who is tough, would be able to tackle this huge problem of Mali, in addition to the Tuareg issue, but the issue of corruption in the administration, the issue of just the state just not seeming to have a break from anywhere, would finally have someone to address it. And it has been just such a failure for Mali. Leadership, there is a vacuum of leadership that is just unbelievable. To the point that right now, the main actors in Mali politics, aside from the attacks of once in a while AQIM and even indigenous terrorist groups such as the Front de Libération du Massina, the main actors now are the other signatories of the Algiers Accord, that is the platform, and the group that is around MNLA in the north. To the point that just about a week ago, Gatia, which is again this Tuareg group that was supposed to be on the side of the Mali government, on its own, without consulting anybody, but drove into Kidal, the northern part of Mali, and created a new situation that the Mali government has absolutely no play in. So Mali is now moving toward a situation where almost a perfect storm of unbelievably inept leadership, the intensification of the drug trafficking in Mali, which is a huge issue, which is actually at the heart now of the activities of all these groupings in the north, both those who were fighting for the autonomy or independence of the northern part, called Azawad, and those who were on the side of Mali fighting against that, those groups are deeply engaged in drug trafficking to the point that it has become the central issue, almost secondary to terrorism, which actually is fueled by drug money. Which brings me to the international actors very quickly. MINUSMA now has a new chief, the former foreign minister of Chad. And I think he saw clearly that with its current mandate, trying to stay away from drugs, MINUSMA will not be able to do much, and actually has been more and more target of the terrorism, because it is clear that they have not been able to secure the country as they were supposed to. Another external actor is, of course, France, with Operation Barkhane. Barkhane has been the opportunity for France to retake a foothold in the Sahel. Now they have, but although it has marginally dealt with terrorism here and there, it too has tried to stay away from drug trafficking, ignoring conveniently that actually that is at the heart of what is driving terrorism in Mali. So in Mali, in the Sahel in general. So there certainly is a need to reassess the whole approach to anti-terrorism from on the part of these actors. Another external, well, external may not apply here, actor would be Algeria. Earlier, I raised the issue of the shakeup that happened in Algeria, even as Bouteflika is phasing out, if I may say so. Algeria now has a not new, but certainly a new leadership in the intelligence services. And Algeria has been a driving force, as some authors have shown over and over again, has been a driving force of a lot that is going on in the Sahel, in Mali, in northern Mali in particular. So that role, I think, needs to be focused on a little bit more to understand how it is driving some of the dynamics in Mali. Now, back to one of the key points that Anouar made as far as the success of Mauritania on being able to tackle the issue of terrorism. To be sure, they have, Aziz, to his credit, in 2009 when he came to power, did finally recognize that Mauritania was facing and still facing a terrorist problem, and has engaged those who were in jails at the time in some ideological discussion as to why they felt that Islam authorized them to do what they did. And some success was gained there. But one key point to Aziz, I think, to understand even this success, was how he came to power and who helped him come to power and maintain power. Aziz had to show his backers, in particular France, which was negotiating with him, even as he overthrew the only democratically elected president in the history of Mauritania. France was negotiating with him agreements for Total to have some exploration of oil in the north, and signing with him agreements with regard to security to help France free some of the hostages that it had at the time. So from there, I think, was born this Aziz as the champion of anti-terrorism in the Sahel. Now, nobody knows exactly how he succeeded in making sure that, aside from an attempt against his own life in 2013, nothing else happened. But the assumption of most is that there has to be a secret agreement between him and some of the actors, the terrorist groups, that basically is kind of a gentleman agreement. You don't mess with us, and basically we will turn a blind eye on you doing other things in neighboring countries, Mali in particular. And Mauritania has been playing a double game with respect to its role in northern Mali and relation with terrorists in general. So let me just finish with an interview that recently was given by the former head of state of the transition in Mauritania, Eliud Mohamed Val, a cousin to Aziz and one of his earlier mentors. Mauritania is moving surely toward a catastrophe. The term that he uses is that there is a gathering storm that Mauritania is facing. First of all, the largest number of terrorists in all these groups in the Sahel, as Anouar just mentioned, are Mauritanians. They come from these schools, mahadras, that basically have become breeding grounds for terrorists throughout the region. So that has not been addressed recently. Here's why, and let me finish on that. Aziz has been quite adept at engaging in double language, double talk, depending on who is the Islamists who are now growing in leaps and bounds in Mauritania. He has presented himself as the leader who finally accepted them in the political game, and now they are about to overtake him because of the economic and social problems that, again, Anouar just mentioned. He really has nowhere to turn. And an alliance is growing between him and the Islamists that nobody knows. And the Islamists, and in some cases, some terrorist groups, nobody knows where that is going to end. In French, we call that une fuite en avant. I can't translate that in English, but basically, this kind of attitude that basically makes you oblivious of what's going on around you and just forces you to basically go straight into the war. Well, I don't know if that metaphor makes any sense, but let me just stop there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gbemisola.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I also want to thank the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, the African Peace Building, and everybody who has been part of this, and especially you members of the audience. This is a group I've engaged with in the last 6 or 7 years, and this is why I've captioned my talk yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's an aggregate of my engagements and works on the group. Now, I start by looking at Nigeria's Fourth Republic as an age of insurgencies, because we have 6 geopolitical zones, and in each of these geopolitical zones, you could easily locate at least one active insurgent group. So that defined the birth of our Fourth Republic as early as the year 2000 the OPC, the MASOB, which is now IPOP, the Ijaw Youth Congress that became MEND. In the North Central, which is not really known, we have a group called Ombase, which killed over 100 security personnel in one attack, but that was not really reported. It's an ethnic militia of the Egon. And in the North Central, which I call Nigeria's Middle East, where the issues of ethnicity and religion conflate, you have a lot of, so many groups of youths defending different ethnic agendas. In the Northwest, we've always had parallel communities. A classical example is that of El Zakzaki, which has been there for a very long time. Then the Northeast has become the face of the house of Boko Haram in recent years, which is the focal point of my talk. Now, Boko Haram didn't just start with the killing of Mohammed in 2009. The group started around 1999, made up of radicalized elements, against the background of the push by the northern political elite for the full implementation of Sharia. People saw in it an opportunity to actually bring about an Islamic state in northern as a way of having. Most of the arms came, speaking to the issue of Sahel, when that will end up becoming towards many one, but now farming, fishing, and donation, because at the time they had over 540,000 members across northern Nigeria. Later, they took to crime, which they regarded as hiking Allah, that is God's work, but actually robbery. It was called hiking Allah because they believed they were doing it for the sake of Allah. Begging, the arms collected by the Al-Majiri. Money laundering has been another source of income or finance for the group. Now, before Mohammed Yusuf became the face of the organization, we've had people like Abu Umar, Muhammad Ali, and Boubacar who left for University of Medina in 2002. Now, the Boko Haram of Mohammed Yusuf himself was born in 1970 and lived till 2009. According to available information, he joined Abubakar Mujahid and aid of El Zakzaki, with whom he left for Kano to start the Jamaatul Tajid Islam in the 90s, and he was later made the army of the group in Borno State. According to another source, Yusuf and many of those with whom he formed Boko Haram had earlier relationship with a group known as Al-Sunnah, which was formed by graduates of the University of Medina to spread Wahhabism in Nigeria. The group was said to have received encouragement from Gumi and the Zala movement with the aim of reforming Islam in northern Nigeria. He was a big man, using our local description of well-to-do people. He dealt in Arabic gum. He had an Islamic school in Jalingo, Taraba State, North Central, which was actually a sleeper cell. He was raising up to 500,000 naira daily from contributions by followers, just 1 naira daily. As a former ally of the Borno State governor, who is now the chairman of the PDP, that used to call itself the biggest political party in Africa, he benefited from state contracts and other forms of government patronage. He also used his Arabic gum business for money laundering for the governor. At the time of his death, there were over 440 members. Now, how did the name Boko Haram, how did it become legitimized and, celebrated, or the christening? Now, during one of his sermons, Muhammad Yusuf told members that there was no need for Western education due to their inability to secure jobs. So why are you going to school if you are jobless? On their own, within that frenzy, they started bringing out their degrees, diplomas, and certificates and started destroying them, which was like a final bye-bye to anything Western. So, as I say here, Boko partly became Haram because it failed. perhaps if Boko, that is Western education, had met their aspirations of getting employment and fulfillment, it wouldn't have become Haram. Now, you choose Boko Haram and the community. I'm looking at this in phases. From 2003 to 2007, the group consolidated its power and gained local legitimacy, especially because of the exercise of the military and support from the rich, the influential, and the poor. Now, talking about support from the rich, this was a time that the northern elites took on the government and were protesting against immunization. It's interesting that one of the people who later parted ways with Muhammad Yusuf, Dati Ahmed, was one of the people championing the no immunization movement in the north. As a result of that, rather than focusing on more serious threats, the elites at that time were busy doing something else. The security men also messed up the situation at this time because anytime people went to tell them to give intelligence, it was common for such people's home to be invaded and the father or the males in those families slaughtered. So at that point, there was a loss of confidence in the states, especially in the police, by the people who became afraid and scared of reporting anything about Boko Haram so that the breadwinners or males in their families would not be killed. Now, 2007 to 2009, he finally broke ranks with the Muslim community, who had earlier given him a sort of tacit support. He killed his known Malam or teacher, that is Sheikh Adam Jafar in Kano. He rejected entreaties to show militant Islam by notable people such as Ibrahim Fantami and Sheikh, they call him Dairu Bauchi or Idris Bauchi. Now, he broke ranks with the Muslim elites like Dat Ahmad, with whom he had a relationship. Dat Ahmad is the promoter of Sharia in Nigeria, and he now went after clerics. Any one of them who countered this message, got killed. Bafugu, who was his nominee to the government of Ali Modu Sharif, was also killed in police custody. Now, this was shortly after he wrote a petition against the Boko Haram. In July, members of the group were on a procession to bury one of their own and had an encounter with the police. It became chaotic, and for 5 days, there was a brutal, exchange, which culminated in the killing of Muhammad Yusuf. Now, to sum it up, under Yusuf, Boko Haram focused more on hard targets. Implementation of Sharia in the north. They wanted to replace Ali Modu Sharif as governor of Borno State. Now, interestingly, my sources in the intelligence community told me that at a point, Mohamed Yusuf started on his own visiting them to lay complaints rather than going violent. So at that point, until his death, there was a sort of mutual understanding between him and the intelligence community in Nigeria. And up to 2008, de-radicalization was taken seriously by the government. Enter Boubacar Shekau. He makes no discrimination between hard and soft targets, unlike Muhammad Yusuf, especially places of public mass gatherings, churches, mosques. He went after escapees, journalists, elites, local and international institutions like the UN office and police headquarters. He went on abductions. He made, and he's still making very good use of the social media, posting videos. He captured territories, though he has lost so many of them now. He gained global reckoning by being listed as an FTO in 2013, went into alliance with ISIS, attempted entering the southwest, sometimes in 2014. Now, I want to dwell on this shortly because it was reported that there was a gas explosion somewhere in Apapa. But my findings revealed, my investigations revealed that in actual fact, it was actually an attempt by these people, and over 100 arrests have been made in Lagos, and one particular person was also arrested in Ilorin. The oil stealing of Shekau, we all know is, it's not real. Now, all of this under GEJ occurred because we had a very poor and unmotivated military. The group itself suffered some losses, like the arrest of one of their key men, Kabiru Shokoto. The government of GEJ, Jonathan, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, was indecisive until towards the end of his regime on how to actually handle the group, which informed so many failed talks. Therefore, I feel there was no clear-cut strategy on how to engage with Boko Haram. Now, today, the Boko Haram is the highest killing terrorist organization locally, going by numbers. It is fully transregional. Talks have been foreclosed. There's now an ongoing full-scale military action against the group. The group itself is expanding attacks in capital cities, especially PMGs. There's now the use of girls as suicide bombers. Now, sometimes, one of my sources told me that at a time, the group, after capturing girls, deliberately impregnated those women in anticipation that even if they die, those ones will continue the hiking, Allah. And I have a feeling that some of those children might actually be the ones now being used as suicide bombers, because if you see those arrested now, they're like 9, 10-year-olds, girls used for such. The group has now melted into the society. It's still in Sambisa because my military sources told me the place is mined. So getting access to Sambisa is still a tough deal for the military. Now does one suicide bombing, attacking intents now, which is a sign of it that it has been fractured, unlike before when it used to attack in hundreds. Yes, I think I will. Okay, there are policy gaps and missteps by the two regimes so far, and some of them are listed here. Less attention paid to de-radicalization since 2008. Poor coordination of the intelligence responses, because now a section of the Nigerian security sector, so many of them are feeling maligned because there's more attention to the army now in engaging Boko Haram, and some of them feel they have been marginalized in those responses. Now, I have a table showing the number of attacks carried out in each of the 19 northern states, including Abuja, since 2003. And based on that, I feel the epicenter may be the northeast, but every state in northern Nigeria is vulnerable because they do different things in different states. There's also what I call the fallacy of a technical defeat, as claimed by the president. It is not real in any way. There's need to win hearts and minds as part of police responses. Yes, increasing arrests are ongoing, but I feel going forward we need to secure the spaces, the borders. We need to humanize security for women and men, and including children. We need to make democratic narratives attractive more than jihadist narratives. Trauma healing, rehabilitation and reintegration of escapists. What do we do with the civilian joint task force, now numbering over 200,000, some of which were used for the last elections, because I've also been interacting with the group. How do we enlist the traditional and religious elites? The need for a grand counterterrorism strategy focusing on threats emanating from each state and vulnerabilities. They need to also rethink America's relations with northern Nigeria's Muslim community to further deconstruct anti-Americanism.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I know that you have a lot more to go, and hopefully some of that information will come out in the question and answer session. Just very quickly, I know that you started, you ended on the note of really American engagement with the Nigerian government with the notion
Northern Muslim community.
Northern Muslim community.
Yeah.
One of the things that really might be worth in terms of just starting up the conversation is for you to talk a little, because the present president, Buhari, came on really a wave of optimism. Nigerians would argue that apart from the economic circumstances in Nigeria, one of the key issues in the election was the campaign against Boko Haram. There's a sense that he's almost a year in office, hasn't made much change or much difference. So I would want you to respond to that. Just very quickly, and this is to Anouar and Boubacar. In terms of external actors, as you said, one of the things that happens with Mauritania is under the radar. A little maybe amplification on U.S. relationship with Mauritania, and how that plays into potentially Mauritania being under the radar insofar as focus is concerned. It's a site of producing, as you're saying, young, militant people who actually participate all over the place in GIA. What is it about this relationship with the United States that doesn't get Morocco in the spotlight? And Boubacar, if you could talk a little about ECOWAS relationship and intervention in Mali, and then after that we can go to questions. So,
yeah, thank you very much. Again, as I said earlier about the fallacy of a technical defeat. Boko Haram is not decimated yet, though it may be fractured. And one peculiar thing about the group is that it has this ability to regenerate. Before now, even under Jonathan, the group suffered some setbacks. And it was during those, anytime it had a setback, that was when you had of the group opening or welcoming talks. But the moment it recovered, then those talks were jettisoned, and the bombings and attacks continued. Yeah, Buhari seems to have a more militaristic understanding of the challenges of how to go about counter-terrorism. He has moved the command to the northeast. A lot of things, so many, like the multinational joint task force that is now in place. So on that front, Buhari has gone steps ahead of Jonathan. But internally, there is no attention paid to the vulnerability in each of the northern states of Nigeria. Because based on my research, only 2 states have not experienced attacks by Boko Haram, and that is Kwara State and Nasarawa State. All the entire states have suffered one thing or the other from Boko Haram. Also in Niger State, there used to be a group called, a community was established and was called Darul Islam in Niger State. And for long, they just like a miniature of Boko Haram. After a while, the state governor went after the group. But all members of the group went and joined Boko Haram. So the presence of Boko Haram in the northern states comes in different forms, which I think the Buhari administration must also pay attention to, and not just the militaristic engagement that is doing well and better than what Jonathan did.
Right, for the U.S. and Morocco's, U.S. relationship is very close with Mauritania, because the United States, in the middle 2000s, it developed a typology of states in the Sahel. They were states that were unwilling and incapable, right? Those were unsalvageable, basically the Malian government, right? Then there were states that were unwilling, right? States that were willing but incapable, and that's Mauritania and Niger. And then there were states that were unwilling but capable, that's Algeria, right? So they focused on on this perimeter of states, the bulwark against Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Mujah, another terrorist group. So they picked Mauritania and Niger, right, as models, and they found already ally in Aziz. I mean, since Aziz assumed presidency in 2009, you know, the terrorist attacks ceased in 2011. Security has improved dramatically. So he's seen as a willing guy, right? So how to salvage that regime is by beefing up the coercive apparatus of the state. And that's what the United States and the French and the European Union have been doing, helping the government better control its borders, modernize its army, etc., etc. In that, they have been quite successful. In terms of Morocco, it's very complicated because, you know, historically Mauritania, you don't need to go to history, but Mauritania has to walk a very fine line between the two big, right, Morocco and Algeria. Right? When Aziz came to power, the Moroccans thought that you know, he was trained as, you know, in Meknes in Morocco. But as of today, there is no Mauritanian ambassador in Morocco, so the relationship has become quite tense. But nevertheless, the Mauritanians are trying not to upset either Morocco or Algeria, because both, obviously, countries have been suspected at different intervals of playing a role in domestic politics. Whether they had a role or not in the coup of 2005 or 7, I can't tell, right? So that's why Morocco is a little bit on the sideline, and that's why Morocco is looking for other allies, which is basically in West Africa, you know, Mauritania, Senegal, and others, and it's sidestepping Mauritania. Morocco also hosts some political opponents of Aziz, and that's part of the reason why Aziz does not want to send an ambassador to Morocco, while Morocco has their own ambassador in Mauritania.
Yeah, again, I will extend the role of ECOWAS to that of the AU. As I said, when I was in November there, I was in a mission led by the AU. But if I may, let me just go back quickly to the US in Mauritania. Without, again, going too far back, the US was quite involved, particularly after the 1999 recognition of Israel by Mauritania at the time, led by Colonel Wooster. Wooster then was, again, facing a radicalizing opposition, just like Aziz is right now, and he very cleverly withdrew from the grand Arab consensus of not recognizing Israel, and he did, and he got himself a huge break from the Clinton administration, which helped him a great deal get out of the tight spot he was in at the time. And now, of course, it was said by some sources that they played a role in his overthrow in 2005, which I personally don't believe was the case. And of course, when Aziz came to power, like I said, the democratic government that came before him, led by the civilian Sir Sheikh Abdullahi, was accused of being too lenient with Islamists, and actually that was one of the reasons that was exploited by Aziz to overthrow him. And then I think, without saying so much, France and the United States did applaud and did indeed see in him a potential ally in the fight against terrorism, which was the number one issue. Again, typically, they both forgot that stand is also related to issues of domestic politics and the dynamics in Mauritanian society. And certainly he held his side of the bargain since 2009, basically doing a lot of the bidding of those who were very rightly so concerned with terrorism in the Sahel. And again, the danger, and this is again an excellent part of the piece Anouar wrote. The danger is actually to ignore the connection between the dynamics, the domestic, political, and societal, etc. dynamics, and the fight against terrorism, and to risk maybe putting too much emphasis on one dimension and forgetting how it is connected to the rest. Now, very quickly, ECOWAS. ECOWAS, again, is quite advanced compared to other regional organization in terms of security, in terms of other politics, but of course it showed its limit when the Mali crisis erupted, and it tried to do something, and there was no consensus, and of course no means to do much about it, and it was a complete failure that basically forced France to intervene in January 2013 with Operation Serval. Now, the AU since had upped its game. It has set up Sahel, which is the organization ably led, I must say, by Pierre Buyoya, the former president of Burundi, to play the role that the AU wants to play in the crisis. And again, they have very limited means, but they have been able, by all accounts, with everybody you talk to in Mali, to play a major role in reducing the tension and focusing on what needs to be done. Again, like I said, unfortunately, the Malian leadership has been completely absent as far as taking the steps that it needs to be taking after the agreement signed in Algiers, which to this day has not started to be implemented, which again is a major problem for Mali and for the entire region.
So let me open it up for questions. So we'll take 3 questions first. Let me start on this side, yeah.
Michael, United Nations, Office of Military Affairs. My question is related to Boko Haram. The mandate for the multinational joint task force against Boko Haram is extended in January. My question is, what is your current assessment about the capabilities of this multinational joint task force? And do you see this as a vehicle for closer cooperation between the different countries in the region, especially in the field of security?
To the side, so let me start front, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Alice Bullard, and hi, and I'm a historian, a university historian who is also a lawyer, and I work in Mauritania in human rights. So, among other things that I do. But I was very interested to not hear the words human rights in these talks, although I did hear the name of someone who I work with, which is Biram Daabe. So I want to thank you for such a great panel. It's very, very interesting. And I wanted to bring up human rights, which I think really needs to be discussed here, along with the rule of law, which is also a very live issue. And I just wanted to add one detail in current events that to add to Professor Ndai's presentation, which is the recent, I find it a little amusing. My initial reaction to this was, is this a joke? But apparently it isn't, which is a man named Dr. Saad Loulay has tried to, just in the past days, take over Biram's organization. Biram has been in jail since 2014 and is serving a 2-year sentence for basically disrupting the public peace because of an anti-slavery event that he was affiliated with. And while he's in jail, a man named Saad Loulay is trying to take over his organization. And of course, people suggest that the president, Aziz, is funding this takeover. So it's all very interesting, and that is a very current event that we're working with.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Labat. I'm at American University, and this year at the Wilson Center downtown. I have 2 really quick questions on Mauritania. Number 1, I was hoping that one of you could maybe comment on the demographic profile of these Mauritanian foreign fighters, and particularly how it overlaps with these ethno-racial sort of divisions within Mauritania. So are these people being drawn from Afro-Mauritanians? Does it extend to the Haratin as well? Second question is related, I guess, to this issue of foreign fighters as well. from the outside, we hear a great deal about Aziz's monitoring of mosques and use of the coercive capacities of the state to crack down on extremist Islamist segments within Mauritania. I felt that there was a bit of a suggestion in your comments that, you know, there's this double game he's playing, and that possibly that kind of surveillance and control doesn't extend to the Madrasa and doesn't extend to all of the extremist elements within Mauritania. So do you feel that he's still fueling this kind of radicalization, or are we just dealing with the aftermath of earlier space prior to Aziz coming to power?
So one more quick question, and then we'll have a quick round of response, and then I'll call from the back.
Good morning. My name is Scott Morgan. I'm the president of Red Eagle Enterprises. I also have two quick questions. The first regarding Boko Haram, with the other states in the northern part of Nigeria being vulnerable. So basically, should there be a change in strategy from a counterterrorism strategy to a counterinsurgency strategy, or creating a hybrid of the two? And my second question is regarding Mali and MINUSMA. Regarding their mandate, does it need to be tweaked so it's set up like similar to what you see in the DRC, where you have regional actors also creating a standby force and assisting with capacity building, so that they're not reliant on outside actors such as France, Algeria, or the U.S.? That way, having regional voices that have actual reasons to interact and see more Mali strengthen and become a more stronger state, they have reason to do it. Wouldn't it be a viable option instead of having outside voices like Paris and Washington dictate?
Thank you. So we'll start with Anouar, then Boubacar, and Gbemisola.
All right. Yeah, for the issue of human rights and the rule of law, you're absolutely right. These are core issues, and this current administration, or the previous administration for that matter, has not done much to tackle them or to advance the rights of especially the rights of the Haratin in particular, but also the rights of the Afro-Mauritanians. So that was not a top strategy. There was, as I mentioned in my talk, Aziz did take some initiatives, right? Whether it's through nominations, whether it's through creation of ministerial committee to address some issues with. So in terms of the legal aspect of it, I think there have been major improvements. In terms of the enactment of what has been passed, in the legislature, that's still, up in the air. The rule of law is very difficult to address because, Aziz seems as he's the strongman in Mauritania, but his status is quite vulnerable. He's threatened from within the military itself. Remember, 70% of conscripted soldiers come from the Haratin, and most of the leadership of the military comes from the east. And that's not where Aziz's tribe come from. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities for him. And then to try to change the socio-economic, model, there is fear that if he tinkers with it, that might obviously bring down the house. So what he said is that he relies on economic growth, right? And hopefully economic growth would trickle down to everybody. But as you rightly said, now there is obviously a crisis. The price of iron and gold and oil has plummeted. In terms of demographic profile, I don't have numbers, but up until very recently, it was mostly drawn from one particular category, which is the Bidan. I mean, the Afro-Mauritanians have been quite immune to it at a certain point, ideologically, because they see, obviously, Islamism is another form of oppression, like Arabism. So they were never really drawn to it. That's why they have their own organizations, to protest. So most of it comes from the Bidan. But we know cases in which some Haratin, they have joined terrorist group. In fact, the first two suicide bombers, were drawn from the Haratin. And if we take Mali as an example, we have seen that we thought that, for example, the Tuareg were immune to joining terrorist group. That wasn't true, right? With Ansar Deen, we thought that Fulani and other groups, were immune. That wasn't true. In fact, the Songhai and others, they joined in massive numbers, in 2012. So can that happen in Mauritania? You bet. Because the ingredients are there. All the push factors, are there. What's lacking is those four factors for now. As for the mahadras, not all mahadras are bad. In fact, the majority of mahadras, as far as I understand, they don't advance, a violent Islamist ideology. Yes, they may create the infrastructure by their reading of Islam, which is very conservative. But what's the alternative? So the state has not done much to try, to modernize these mahadras, because they still cater to massive constituencies. Public schools are in miserable conditions, and in many areas they're not even there. So whether Aziz is playing double game or not, I'll just defer to you. Obviously, you have better information than I am.
All right. Thank you. Again, a lot of excellent questions. Certainly, I didn't mean to, and I know Anouar also mentioned it, and he certainly wrote about it in his piece. Certainly didn't mean to neglect at all the human rights angle. It is a huge part of the dynamics in Mauritania, and certainly cannot be neglected, if only because, again, the UN Human Rights Prize winner, Biram Abeid, is sitting in a jail for actually trumped up charges and a sentence that was meted out by a court system that is completely politicized. And again, you mentioned the most recent development on this fellow called who was the spokesperson for the ERA, that is the organization that advocates quite militantly the rights of the Haratin and in particular the enslaved the Mauritanians. He was here just a few months ago, and I met with him, and I thought that it was a real deal. But again, part of what's going on in Mauritania is how, and you mentioned it in your piece, how Aziz and the power structure around him can manage this growing threat of the Haratin and make sure, in particular, that they do not link up with the claims to a better share of the national pie on the part of the Negro Mauritanians. And it is quite revealing that this Lunaid fellow, the first thing out of his mouth, literally, challenging his being ousted from Iraq, was that Iraq was taken over by the Negro Mauritanians, and that he doesn't want to be part of that. And again, that tells you all you need to know about the fact that in all likelihood, he was used, instrumentalized by the government of Aziz to kind of draw a wedge between those two components of the Mauritanian socio-cultural, political landscape that, again, are growing more and more militant. That is, I think, a key thing here in understanding the risks that runs for the country and for terrorism. Now, Andrea raised the issue of the profile, and I think he answered it quite well. Negro Mauritanians and actually even Bedan Mauritanians are of the Sufi school. They really, until very recently, they really cannot think twice about the Salafi brand of Islam that was brought over the years from Qatar and from Saudi Arabia on just millions and millions of dollars. But as Anouar said, those who engage in terrorist activities are by and large Bilan. Although the first suicide bomber in the history of Mauritania in front of the French embassy was a Haratin. Now the double game that Aziz is playing, I didn't do justice to it because again it would take you in a lot of direction, take a lot of time. But he is caught in this game that he has played since the beginning. One of the reasons why he took power, according to him, was that Sirul Sheikh Abdullahi was too close to the Islamists because he had built a mosque, for example, in the presidential palace. So that was the reason why he came into power. Now, he understood very well that he had to find some kind of agreement with a growing Islamist movement in Mauritania. For example, when Biram burnt those slave promoting books, and he got his Mukhabarat security services to kind of whip up the Islamist sentiment, they marched to the palace, and he came out dressed as in some kind of a Salah ad-Din leader of the Islamic world, and wrapped himself in the mantle of the defender of Islam. And of course, that encouraged all of them. There has been an infrastructure of Islamists growing up in the country for a long time. Now they have started to become so powerful that he is tempted to cut them to size. And of course, the monitoring of mosques is part of that. Now, recently he tried to close down some of the muhadras that became just breeding ground for terrorists. He had such a pushback that he had to back off. So he could not take it anywhere. So that is, I think, the catch-22 he is caught into. And let me just stop there. Scott raised the issue of MINUSMA. I totally agree with you. I think the mandate of MINUSMA needs to be expanded, not just to make sure that fighting drugs is part of their mandate, which now it is not, and their new chief said, well, it should be, but also making sure that before they leave, and that could be quite soon, there is something else than Barkhane.
Okay, so you have about 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. The first question was the capabilities of the multinational joint task force. Yeah, I think it should be encouraged because it has recorded a level of success. And whether it can lead or, serve as an opportunity for a regional response to the threat of insecurity. I say yes, but it should not stop there because the northeast of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Mali, Benin Republic, and all of these places are actually borderless. So there must also be further attempts to ensure that there's what I call social construction of security, maximizing the cultural and religious ties of the people living in the region. Because no matter how long the task force stays, it will leave one day. So it is important to ensure that in each of these countries, democracy works and state-society relations are improved. But indeed, it has the potential to lead to to increase regional cooperation for securing the entire zone. On how to engage the vulnerabilities in northern Nigeria, given the disparity in demography, size, and other peculiarities, it is important to pay both specific and general attention, which may lead to the kind of hybrid approach in ensuring that peace and security get sustained in the region. Yeah.
So I'm sorry we can't take more questions. I'm told that I'm the guy between you and lunch. And lunch would be outside on the corridor. Everybody is expected to come back at 1 so that we can have the presentation by the guest speaker. Please join me in thanking Anouar, Boubacar, and Gbemisola.